Good evening and welcome to the Ask the Author Live video conference hosted by Lady AJP Ministries. And thank you for being a part of today's audience. Our mission is to connect Christian living authors with other authors, writers, and readers by creating a networking platform that benefits all. Attendees will receive information, insight, and inspiration as our authors share their knowledge and experience concerning their published works. And as a special thank you to our guests, we conclude our conference each month with a random drawing for an autographed book. Today's special guest is out of Rock Hill, South Carolina, and we'll be discussing standing on holy common ground, an Africentric ministry approach to prophetic community engagement. The synopsis reads, many critics have perceived a growing schism between the Black faith community and the wider African American community. The Black church can be accused of a benign neglect of the very communities in which most of them were birthed and belong. In this book, author Lester Agyei McCorn conceptualizes an effective partnership to revitalize and mobilize the church in community by sharing a common story between congregants and residents, building consensus around common goals, and thus building common wealth. Utilizing the methods of liberation theology and church-based community development, this represents a praxis model that leads to reconciliation and restoration. This book asserts that a key for a renaissance can be found in the recovery of an Africentric communal ethos in order to reestablish a cultural and spiritual connection between the church and the community. A renewed holy common ground. And now I introduce to some and present to others the author of Standing on Holy Common Ground, an Africentric ministry approach to prophetic community engagement, author Lester Agyei McCorn. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Angela. How are you?
I am doing well, and I am so excited that you have joined us today. This book has stirred up something in me. I want to let you know that this work is vital, not just to the church, but to our communities. And thank you, sir, for your obedience in getting this work out so that others can benefit from your insights. Thank you.
Oh, that was my hope. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, let's jump right in. What compelled you to write about prophetic community engagement from the perspective of an Africentric ministry approach?
Well, in a sense, it's somewhat autobiographical, right? I'm a product of the Black church. I'm a church baby. I grew up in the church. I love the church. I served the church. I spent all of my adult life as a pastor and preacher in the Black church. And I also, worked in community. So I saw in my lifetime, I've seen us move further and further away from each other. And I think that that is one of the main reasons our communities are struggling, because the one institution that brought us over, kept us together, was an advocate and an agent for community growth and development. The Black church was in many ways absent, even though our buildings were physically present in Black communities. And in a real sense, we were absent. And the trend was only getting worse in my estimation. So I spent my time trying to, so to speak, bridge the gap between the Black community and the Black church. It seems kind of strange, ironic, if you will, that you have to build a bridge because we are part and parcel of one another. But socially, culturally, and spiritually, we have become disconnected. So I used my doctoral dissertation. This book, by the way, I'm glad it's experiencing a little bit of a resurgence, but this book is nearly 10 years old. And it's the result of my doctoral dissertation. And I of course, because it was practical, I lived it out, practiced it, and used methodology through the church that I was pastoring in Baltimore, the Pennsylvania Avenue AME Zion Church on the west side of Baltimore.
Yes, well, I'll tell you, I've heard a number of times pastors that have asked if the church closed up and moved out today, would the community know it?
Yep.
And I think that may be one of the reasons why this particular book becomes vital for us today, because of the insights that you give, talking about the different things that created some of the challenges that we have and some of the things we'll need to do in order to move beyond the challenge and actually reach the goal. So thank you. That's very insightful. Now, in the foreword, Dr. Otis Moss III states that with mobility in the segregated South, the growing Black middle class rejected the African influenced modes of worship. What is the connection between that belief and prophetic community engagement?
Oh, that's a great question. And I'm indebted to my friend, Dr. Moss. We've been friends for 30 years, and his church represents for me the model that we're striving for. And although it's not perfect, and I think Dr. Moss would say it, he stands on the shoulders of the Reverend Dr. Jeremiah Wright, who was one of my heroes. I admired him and adopted him as a mentor and a model for my own ministry. And when I served on the south side of Chicago at Martin Temple AME Zion, I got a chance to meet and develop a relationship with Dr. Wright. And Dr. Moss is a phenomenal preacher in his own right. So he writes from a place of knowledge. He's the son of a legend, Otis Moss Jr. And of course, he went to Morehouse and Yale Divinity School. And, you know, he understands the trajectory of the Black church from its origins to its current reality. And he writes about something that really helps to explain the divide that I referred to earlier. And people in the audience will be able to appreciate this. If you've studied Black history and studied the Black church or grew up in the Black church, you know that we have evolved. And we've gone through several changes, and we are not exempt from the culture in which we reside. In other words, African Americans, when we began to move into urban centers and experience the period of integration, for many of us, integration meant assimilation. Assimilation to white modes of thinking, behaving, and acting. And we mistakenly believed that in order for our churches to be legitimate, we had to be more Eurocentric. And so what Dr. Moss is referring to, which I write about extensively in the book, is that we began to distance ourselves from anything that was real Black, Black. You know, our music changed. Obviously, our dress changed. We wanted to be accepted and respectable. And so many of our churches, which became more mainstreamed, were that because they had music that was more Eurocentric. They had a worship service that was less emotional, less African-centered. And so with that, again, becomes this disassociation with our roots. And so what I'm writing about is how we can recover and reclaim that, and understanding that there is no inferiority in our African heritage and culture. And the more we can accept that, the more sense of pride and ownership we can have about our total story. And that includes our religious history, right? Because many people mistakenly believe that Black folks didn't have religion before Europeans introduced it to us.
Right.
And if we did have a religion, it wasn't legitimate. It was somehow inferior. It was a caricature, all those things that we began to adopt in our minds, which I think hurt us as a people. And so my goal has been throughout my ministry, and even, you know, my work in academia, is to get us to recover our sense of power in our own story, in our own culture, because that's what brought us over, and that's what's going to get us through this next period that we're going through.
Absolutely. Our history is a part of our identity. It determined who we were as a people. And when we embrace our history, we have a better sense of who we were, which helps us to become the people God intended us to be in the future. So it's just vital. Now, talking about our history, discuss for a few minutes the foundational history of the tragedy and triumph, the survive and thrive miracle of our community.
Yeah, great way to put it. It is a miracle. I mean, the Black church and the Black community, we're both miracles.
Yeah.
Starting with the community, I mean, the fact that we were able to survive the horrors of slavery and the brutal dehumanization that we as a people collectively experience and still experience, right? So, I had an interesting interview this week with a white radio personality who, thought he was going to get by just saying, racism is both of our problems, that we're both guilty, Black people and white people. And I had to correct him and check him on that, right?
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, I had to do that. I couldn't let him get away with it. We're laughing and smiling, but I'm waiting for my turn to speak so that I can beg to differ with him, right? So to your question, there was a systemic attempt to get us to hate ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
That really what it is. It was an attempt to get us to disavow. The classic metaphor we use is in that powerful moment in Roots. And everybody saw Roots, where the master forces Kunta Kinte to disavow his name and become Toby. Right?
Mm-hmm.
That's such a powerful moment because it's not just about what happened to one man, it happened to an entire race of people in America.
Yes.
To try to get us to disavow who we are. So that tragedy is still with us. We are still struggling with it. It's psychological and it is passed down in our DNA. The trauma of dehumanization has been passed down from generation to generation. The way we were able to withstand it is the genius and beauty of the Black church, right? We were able in the Black church to embrace our personhood, our innate power and strength as a people. We had strategies that we employed. Some of them were overt and some of them were covert. We learned how to send messages to each other to help us survive through this whole thing. And the Black church was really the carrier of that. More than any other institution, because it was ours. We could do whatever we wanted to do. We've owned it. We've been able to dictate what happens in our institutions. And I'm a product of it. I mean, I was able to withstand brutal poverty. I mean, I grew up very, very poor. I was homeless for a while. The one constant that I can point to is the Black church. The church helped me. And so spiritually, culturally, psychologically, it embedded something in me that gave me the fight, the drive to go on. And unfortunately, one of the reasons, again, that I wrote the book is because there's a whole generation. We're working on probably our third generation of folk that did not grow up in the Black church, right? Who haven't had the resources, spiritual, psychological, cultural resources of the Black church that enables us to withstand. Thank God we still have HBCUs.
Yes.
I'm a fierce advocate and defender of HBCUs, but those really are the two institutions, right? The Black college and the Black church. They have been able to help us to overcome and to overachieve.
Absolutely. And that's a beautiful segue into my next question. Historically, what roles has the Black church played in providing networks of kinship and support?
Wow, that's great. Yeah, that's it, right? And I don't know, we didn't have a strategic plan, right? It's not like we wrote it out and said, here are the 10 things that the Black church, it was in us. We have always known how to create systems. And I'm glad you used the word kinship, because that's really, kinship is a system that transcends biology, right?
Yes,
You are my sister, even though we're not related, right? But
that's
we
right.
call each other sister. We are connected. And it's why Black folks have always called each other brother and sister. In the
Yep.
Black church, we affix titles to people as brother and sister.
Yeah.
You know, we put, you know, the old folk would say, put a handle on that name. We don't call grown folk by their first name, right? You put a
Right.
handle on it. Your brother, your sister, because of the kinship, right?
Yeah.
And from those kinship ties, we were able to establish all kinds of associations. We got fraternities and sororities and, you know, clubs and all kinds of social organizations. We got banks, we got colleges, we got after school programs, we got, you know, breakfast programs, all kinds of things emanated in and through the Black church because of our kinship. And once again, the reason we are struggling as a people and have become so disintegrated and disconnected is because the kinship ties are now being torn apart. We're divided. We pick sides, and we're like in gangs and cliques and clubs and in competition with one another. That's not African, right?
It's not.
And that's what integration and assimilation did to us. We began to slowly disavow our kinship ties.
Wow, that is so powerful. You discussed, and this is a direct quote from the book, engaging the church in liberating conversations that will lead to reconciliation and restoration.
Mm.
Explain how the church's view of relating with the community influences its impact within the community.
Wow. So one of the things that we are guilty of is coming up with plans and programs that don't include the people we're trying to serve. We often come up with great ideas so that we can try to say that we've done mission to the community and we've done outreach, right?
Yeah.
Those kind of things without asking people in the community where they are. It's like we have a bad habit of scratching where people are not itching.
Yes.
Right? So, I mean, some of it is just common sense, right? You ought to look at, and I used to, when I taught pastors and ministers, I would always say to them, you need to pay attention to what is happening around you. Stop coming up with programs that only serve the people in your church without understanding the context in which you are doing ministry. It makes no sense for me to be pastoring a church in West Baltimore without paying attention to the social economic factors that have led to the demise of the community, right? That I'm just using Pennsylvania Avenue Church as an example. Pennsylvania Avenue is on the main thoroughfare in Baltimore that is probably the best analogy is Harlem. The west side of Baltimore is Baltimore's Harlem. That's where the Upton community. The old Royal Theater is like the Apollo Theater. All of the great musicians, all the great artists, when they came to Baltimore back in the day, they came to the Royal Theater, right? That was it. All of your politicians, you know, Elijah Cummings is from that neighborhood. Perrin Mitchell before him. Thurgood Marshall grew up in that neighborhood. Just a very rich, rich community. And those churches back in the day were strong. You weren't a part of the community if you weren't a part of somebody's church, right? And the church was not a church if it wasn't, you know, relating to the community and having programs for the community. So we have gotten away from that, and we're wondering why our churches are anemic, why they don't have the power and impact that they should have. It's because we have disconnected ourselves from the larger community.
Absolutely. I thoroughly believe that the connection allows us to feed the relevance. When you don't make the real connection and know what's going on with the community and the members of the community, then most of what you're doing is going to be hit and miss because you don't know what they need. So that is absolutely true.
And if I can pick up on the first part of your question, you know, for the quote from my book about authentic conversations, I really think that it's important for us to create venues where people can talk. To be honest, I have a background also as a community organizer, and one of the things I did, really the primary role, was to meet people and do what are called one-on-ones. And I know there are some listeners that understand community organizing. The community organizer would spend all of his or her time going door to door or setting up meetings with people from the community to hear about their stories, to hear about their hopes, their aspirations, their despair, their defeats, all of those things, because it helps to weave together a larger narrative about what this community could be, what it once was, and what it could be. And what we have done in the church, unfortunately, is we're so wrapped up in our programs and what we do that we don't set aside time to just listen to people in the community about what their hurts are and what their hopes are. And sometimes you got to do that outside of the church.
Yes.
We just need to be honest that there are people that won't set foot in our churches because of the perception they have of us, of being aloof and disconnected and unconcerned. You know, they're saying that the preacher only shows up on Sundays and we don't see him in the community. These members drive these fancy cars and they wear these fancy clothes and they drive in on Sunday morning in these commuter congregations. They get their praise on and they don't speak to people. They get back in their car and go back to their neighborhoods, right? So people see it. I mean, we're not dumb. Folks are like, churches really aren't, they really don't care about us. So we need to meet them where they are. You know, we need to go into school meetings. I used to go to PTA meetings. I used to go to community school meetings and center meetings, you know, just so I could meet people, you know. And I think churches need to get back to that. Obviously, in COVID-19, no one was meeting in person face to face. But, you know, we're going to have to really think, you know, to bring this up to today, 2021, as we come out of COVID-19, we should not go back to where we were. There are a whole lot of folk that are saying, when are we going to get back to normal? You shouldn't want to go back to normal.
No.
This is an opportunity for you to turn the corner and do something different, to be the church, not just call yourself church, but be the church. This is a golden opportunity for us to meet the needs of our community. And if you got folks that are hurting, you know, another example I give is after, you know, I was in Baltimore when the Freddie Gray incident happened in the uprisings. And not only was I there, you know, in the front lines and marching and all of that, but if you remember, all the schools were closed. They shut everything down. And children relied on the lunch, the breakfast and lunch that they would get in those schools. So what we did is a bunch of pastors got together. We talked to the mayor. We talked to other people and said, use our churches as food hubs, as food pantries. We started feeding people from our churches. We would get pallets of food and give them out. That goes a long way. People remember that when I was in need during a crisis, that little church on the corner met the needs of my family. More than likely, those people are going to be more apt to come visit your church, to be involved in programs that you're having. We got to get the church out of the building and into the streets.
Absolutely. It's interesting that you talked about the food bank. We have a lot of churches that are now participating in food distribution efforts. And those are the places that people will remember when this time or this particular season ends, and we do get to a place where we can go back in the buildings and do some things in the communities that actually includes the community members. They're going to remember that's the church that had boxes for me every time I showed up needing something to eat. I'm going to go see what they're doing over there. And it becomes that open door. You're absolutely right. If we show the community that as a church, we care about the community, they're more apt to participate in anything that we're having. And then in learning how to show the community that we care for them, we actually come outside the building and make ourselves accessible so that people can develop trust Nobody wants to go talk to you if they don't know who you are and they haven't developed a relationship of trust. And I think that opens the door for that.
That's right.
So
Absolutely. Yeah, and
absolutely
a
important.
major thrust of the book also is talking about how we get to root causes of the manifested problems of our community. The fact that there is poverty, so much poverty in the neighborhoods where many of our Black churches are located. We cannot be satisfied with just having food pantries. We've got to address why there is widespread poverty in our communities. So part of what I talk about in the book is a faith-based approach to community development, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do we begin to address these underserved and disenfranchised and disinvested communities where many of our churches are? Because the fact of the matter is, I know especially in Baltimore, and I suspect that Charlotte is very similar to this, these churches were built in communities where Black folks resided. And then when we arrived, we bought houses in the suburbs or in nice neighborhoods. And back in the day, we lived in a place where we could walk to church.
Yes.
Many of our churches, and the members walked there and were part of that church. Now we drive distances to get to the church, and the community has changed around us. And the church did not take a proactive role in managing and controlling what happened around us.
Right.
And now we have something called gentrification, right?
Yeah.
where other folk are buying up property at cheap prices and then, renovating them, reconstructing them, and driving up the price so that the people who once lived there cannot afford to live there anymore. And then you're really, you're almost a foreigner in your own community. Your own church is foreign to the people who are in the community. So we've got to be a lot more proactive. And there are many examples of churches that have done an outstanding job at community development, who have led in the construction of community centers and schools and housing around the community that's affordable and accessible to the people who really need it the most. And that's what that holy common ground is about. Now we are partners. I think a good example is my friend Dr. Walker and Little Rock.
I was thinking of them. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, Little Rock is doing a great work, and they're leading in the development of housing around their community, and they're partners with the residents in building that. That's what I think the Black church should be doing. And I can speak for my denomination, the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church. More of our churches need to be doing that because it's in our DNA.
Yes. Now, I think you've backdoor answered my next question, which was discuss how the holy common ground is the authentic connection between church and community. And I think that really answers that question.
Yeah, well, the other way I think it helps to answer the question is to allow ourselves to let go of all of the theological arguments that we have had that have kept people from engaging us. We have in many ways pushed people away from the church because of all of our rules, all of our definitions about what it means to be holy and what it means to be faithful to God. And I'm not saying that as a disciple of Jesus Christ, you should not practice spiritual disciplines. You should not try to live a life of integrity and all of that. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is we've got to stop labeling people as other and stigmatizing people, marginalizing people because they don't dress like us. They don't talk like us. They didn't go to the same schools we went to. They don't come from the same neighborhoods we came from. That holy common ground is saying, it reminds me of, I grew up in an era, and you probably heard this, Angela, in the church, we would say there are no big I's and no little U's, right? When you came to church, everybody was equal. We're all God's children. We're all equal in God's sight. We need to extend that to the people in our community. Again, using the example of Pennsylvania Avenue, which I think just a great church. And a lot of people don't know the things that church does in the community. A lot of the members of that church came through the AA program that we had.
Awesome.
Yeah, a lot of people were recovering addicts, and you would never know, right? You just wouldn't know. But because we housed those meetings and programs in the church, people started hanging around. Then they would show up at Bible study. Then they would come to the men's fellowship and the women's fellowship. Then they slip up and come to church on Sunday. And next thing you know, the doors of the church are open and they come down and they join the choir and they join the usher board, right? To me, that's what the Black church should be about, right? People should feel at home, no matter what their station in life is, no matter what they've gone through. We all have issues. All of us have issues. All of us have things that we have had to overcome. Some of us are still struggling with things. The church ought to be the place where people can find refuge. They can find sanctuary. They can find belonging. And that's the holy common ground, right? Again, it's extending the church beyond the building. It's really about people. And if we really love people, then we don't have time to label people and stereotype people. You know, I did a workshop years ago when Black Lives Matter came out, and I asked the question, which upset some people, but I asked the question, do Black lives matter to the Black church?
Oh, wow.
Right? Because the Black Lives Matter movement, is not led by preachers.
It's not.
It is. There's not a whole lot of church folk up front, but they are speaking to the issues that are affecting people, especially around police brutality and criminal injustice and all of that. The church needs to be involved in that, and we don't have to get credit for it. That's the other problem we have. We want to get credit. The preacher wants his name called, wants to be called the president, whatever. No, just show up, bruh. Just be there for the people. They'll eventually know that you're representing the God you serve. Right. They'll know that you're a faithful worshiper and follower of Jesus Christ by your actions, not by your title and not by the name of your church.
I tell you, while you were talking, I was thinking of the scripture that for all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. And when we remember that, because sometimes when we get saved, we get so righteous.
Yes, we're so holy.
We're just so holy. And it separates us from people, which separates us from the work.
Yes.
And I really believe that holy common ground is us recognizing we really all are in the same place. We just made a choice to accept Jesus, which allowed us access to what we didn't deserve. Amen. And if we present ourselves that way to others, then we'll become a magnet that attracts them to God as well. And the best way is to address a concern so that someone knows that we care. And then it opens the door for them to see the love of God through us so they can accept the love of God for themselves. That's the whole, I'm telling you, this book stirred me up. It really did. It really did.
Well, it stirred me up while I was writing it.
I can only imagine. So let's go to it. The heart of this book, to compel the church to partner with its neighbors by preaching an Africentric gospel of responsibility to the least, the lost, and the last in American society is a challenge to fully engage with the community. Talk with us about this charge through the lens of police shootings, educational inequities, double standards in law enforcement, and systemic racism.
Wow. Yeah. Well,
I know it's a lot.
So. Yeah, no, you hit it. I mean, we kind of talked about it before. It's really having empathy, right? You cannot be the Black church and not recognize the existential crises that we are in. And we can't keep putting Band-Aids on it. You know, I mean, the church has to be a place of healing. You know, we have a priestly obligation, we have a pastoral obligation, but we also have a prophetic obligation. And the prophetic deals with the issues that you have just enumerated. This is where we are. This is the reality of our existence in these yet to be United States. As my friend Freddie Haynes always says, we have got to find a way to get in the trenches with people and deal with these issues. But at the same time, we've got to educate ourselves. You know, I did a preaching series as I was working on the dissertation, which became this book. And in one of my sermons, I talked about this saying, if you see something, say something. You know, after 9/11, you know, they had this whole thing, if you see something, say something. And I related that to the church. And I basically said, if you don't see anything, you have nothing to say.
Wow.
So if you're not paying attention to what's happening into you, I mean, think about it. And I once had to talk to a preacher who I heard a sermon after something major had happened in our society that week, and the preacher never referenced it. No reference at all, just ran through the stop sign and kept on going. And to me, that was a serious indictment. And as members of the household of faith, we have to speak to the issues of our day, you know, and we've got to preach it and live it wherever we go. A couple of Sundays ago, I preached at a white Presbyterian church, and I told the pastor, I said, "Now, are you sure you want to have me preach to your people?" And Charlene and I, my wife, were the only two Black folk in the congregation. This was their second Sunday back in the building. So they were all excited and happy to be back in church. You know, church was nearly full. And I got up and I told it like a TI is, right? Yes. I didn't beat them over the head, but I talked about this gospel of love and inclusion. And I talked about the issues. And I said to the people, how can this gospel be good news to the family of George Floyd? How is this good news to the family of Breonna Taylor? How is this good news to the young man that was killed in Columbus, 13 years old? How is this gospel good news if you're not addressing what they're going through? Police brutality and criminal injustice in our society. Jesus died for this. And I reminded them of Jesus's mission statement in his trial sermon. His trial sermon is Luke chapter 4, verses 18 and 19. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. Liberty to the captives. He's talking about criminal justice. He's talking about economic equality, right? That's the gospel that we've been called to preach and live every single day. So again, I mean, I have found in my experience that when you address those issues to the people who are bound, you know, the people who are oppressed, they begin to come alive. Yes. And they begin to accept this gospel as their own. They begin to see Jesus as the great liberator, you know, that he's not the blonde-haired, blue-eyed guy in the Garden of Gethsemane who's not concerned about the issues that are affecting us in our neighborhoods. That's how you create holy common ground, is by letting the gospel do its work.
All right. Okay, so I'm excited. You're excited. I'm sure our listeners are excited. How can our listeners get a copy of Standing on Holy Common Ground?
Oh, I'm glad you asked. I mentioned earlier that the book is 10 years old. So, and it wasn't published by a major publishing house. Although my friend who published it from MMGI Books, Daryl Sims, is a great and major publisher, but it is not in circulation as often. So from time to time, people will say, well, I looked for your book on Amazon and I couldn't find it. It's like, yeah, it's not on, it was on Amazon for years, but it's not there. And maybe I need to correct that and find a way to get it back out there. But the only way right now is you got to order it from me. So, yeah, so if you want to, our listeners, the easiest way is to just Cash App. It's $15, which will include shipping and handling. I didn't add any extra cost in there. And you can, I guess, I could put it in the chat or whatever, but it's a $ LA McCorn on Cash App.
Okay,
$LA McCorn. And make sure that you put your address in the memo line of Cash App so that I can mail the book to you. But I hope to get it reprinted, and I need to do an updated and revised copy of it. So that's what I'm thinking about. I'm working on the second book, which is focused on Martin Luther King's vision for economic justice. The tentative title of it is Good News for the Poor and More.
Wow.
You know, Martin Luther King died fighting for poor people.
Yes.
He was leading the Poor People's Campaign. And many people mistakenly, you know, I hear the Black Lives Matter crowd often saying that Dr. King had adopted, you know, accommodationist ways and respectability politics. These are people that don't understand Dr. King. He was going after capitalism, going after militarism, and he was going after racism. He was going full throttle, which made him even more dangerous. That's why he had to be killed. Because he was fighting against those things. And so I'm recapturing, I'm not the first to do it, many are doing it, but I'm talking more specifically about economic justice in the era of Black Lives Matter, and especially as it pertains to reparations.
That is awesome. Do you have a tentative release date? Do you know about when that might be available?
Well, here's a little secret. I'm actually working on another doctorate. I'm doing a PhD in interdisciplinary studies, and I'm a Martin Luther King scholar. And so I'm getting close to the dissertation phase of writing. So once I finish that, which I hope will be at the end of the year, then I'll turn my attention to turning that into a book that hopefully will be published in another year or so.
Okay. So maybe 22, 23.
Maybe 22, 23, somewhere around there. And you'll be the first person I'll call to come on your show if you'll have me again to talk about it.
I will. We don't even have to go through that. I will. This has been absolutely awesome. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. McCorn. It is giveaway time. So I'm going to go out to Facebook and let's see what kind of activity we've got out there so we can select a winner.
All right.
Let's see. Okay, let's go back. Our very first comment was amen. So I don't know what you said, sir, but Tamara Collins said amen. She was our very
That's my girl. Hey, Tamara.
And Tamara has won an autographed copy of
Congratulations
on Holy Common Ground. So Tamara, if you would go out to my website, that's ladyajpministries.com, ladyajpministries.com, and I'll drop it in the chat, in the Facebook comments for you. Go on my website, click the ATA winner button so you can claim your prize. Thank you so much for watching and commenting today.
Tamara is a member of one of the churches I pastored in New Haven, Connecticut. And that church is an example. We formed a community development corporation. We built a family life center in an old warehouse, old hardware store next to the church. We had the Hannah Gray home for senior women across the street. We had a home for young men called the Hilton House for young men who had been liberated from foster homes. We had all kinds of programs, and the reason I mention that is because Varick was a good example of how a church can change a community, and people began to join that church in droves because we created a holy common ground.
Wow, that's absolutely awesome. So a witness to what can be done has been today's winner. That's absolutely awesome. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us here at Ask the Author Live teleconference. We will be here next month. That's May the 24th, as we host Christian living author Brent LaPrince Edwards, author of You Can't Bully Me Anymore. Be sure to like the Ask the Author Live video conference Facebook page and post your comments about today's conversation. This is author Angela J. Poole with the Ask the Author Live video conference, Lady AJP Ministries, where we're empowered to enlighten, to encourage, and to empower you. We're impacting lives through the word. Blessings.